It's about having the right people in your social circle and in your network.
Avoiding being everywhere. There's also this component of being memorable for some reason. Elegance doesn't mean being noticed, it means being remembered.
Bad content just doesn't get seen. This is very quickly gonna get buried in the feed.
Test, understand what metrics you can monitor, but go from there.
What's your differentiator on the market compared to all the other experts out there?
I want this personal brand thing to feel more fun as a way to explain myself, express myself.
A lot of people jump straight to the, daily posting, and it's not necessarily that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Growth Mentor Live. Today, we are covering all things about how to get started with personal branding. I'm Micah McGuire, head of content here at Growth Mentor, and today I am joined by John Ostrovsky, director of product and experimentation at Wise Publishing, Vasilina Valchanova, digital strategy freelancer. And today we're going to be talking about all the stuff you need to know about getting started with your personal brand. Guys, this is going to be a fantastic session. I definitely suggest grabbing your note-taking materials because this is going to be a knowledge-packed hour. If at any time during the session you have questions, please put those in the chat because we will be working those in throughout our hour together. And yes, there will be a recording available, so you will have that in your inboxes next week. So, from here, Vasi, John, it is great to have you guys with us. We'll go ahead and, I guess, jump right into questions, right?
Do this.
Of course, we're ready.
Okay, awesome. So I think the first one that I have that I usually hate starting off with these kinds of definition questions because I feel like they're so dry. But I feel like personal branding is kind of amorphous enough that we need to cover exactly what we're talking about here. So what is personal branding?
Vasi, you want to start that off?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be very short on this one because there's a very specific quote that I love that sort of covers branding as a whole. And this comes from Jeff Bezos. And he has this awesome, sort of a short phrase that branding is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think that this has two components to it. People usually think about this phrase as are people saying good stuff about you? But I would also say, are people saying the right things? So are they talking about you, positioning you as the type of expert you want to be seen in the real world? Are they saying the exact same stuff that you want people to think about? So these two components, obviously, is it positive, but also is it the right positioning for you? I think that encompasses a personal brand pretty neatly.
Okay, John, anything to add to that?
I had this idea of how people address you when you're not in the room in my notes. I was expecting some definition question as part of our conversation today, so I'm going to be looking at my Obsidian notes and all the connections that I was able to draw from this. I saw myself in preparation of this chat talking with the people from the network and some travels that I've done recently, just asking this. And it's interesting how in my small sample size, answers converge on how you're perceived. But then when you drill down, but perceived how? Perceived what? It's really based on your skills, experiences, personality, and the value that you consistently communicate over time. And building on top of what Vasi suggested, I really like to think as well on how people feel when they see your name in their inbox. But there's a third element to this that I'm going to start adding a twist from the fashion universe. This is a quote from Giorgio Armani. Elegance doesn't mean being noticed, it means being remembered. So there's also this component of being memorable for some reason, for quirks on your personality or the way that you put together components of style. And from Bavik, the way that I like to close this is that it's really important to define your personal brand, because if you don't, people will do it for you. And I think that's not the right place to be.
Yeah. That's a great point, especially about the style. I think you guys have brought up, both really, really excellent points about where that personal brand really comes into play. I had not thought about a lot of that. And I guess kind of based on that definition, I think that we do hear personal branding all the time. And I think a lot of times, because it is kind of vague for people, the buzzword is kind of lost some meaning. So I am sure there are a bunch of misconceptions around personal branding. What would you say are some of those misconceptions? And John, since we had Vasi kick off, I'll kick this one to you first.
Percent. Here is where I start also wearing some of my investor hat. So for a moment, I like to think about branding as a moat. And then Helmer has this book, right, The Seven Strategic Powers, where he would describe branding as a competitive position that comes like this is the keyword duration of brand investing. So that means that we need to evaluate personal branding as time in the market, not timing the market. So it's really like those values and this experience that you communicate consistently over time. So I think this idea of the long-term perspective that you have to take to evaluate personal brand, this is usually a misconception as is suggested. But also this idea that branding at the end of the day is a means to an end. And I have a very specific way to look at this through this KPI system that I expect us to dive into the context as the organic conversation flows. But I'll give the voice to Vasi to complete the misconceptions here from her perspective.
Right. This is actually I love this bit that you mentioned here, and I think consistency is a big part of it, and taking that long-term view is definitely important. And this actually sort of ties in nicely with one of my favorite misconceptions, or as Family Guy says, the thing that grinds my gears. And this idea that personal branding is all about audience building. It's about building a big audience first and foremost. And if you don't have a bajillion followers, you're doing something wrong, right? This is quite common, and there are quite a few branding experts who are basically stoking that fire because they are all the time they're putting the focus point on building more followers, building a larger reach, and so on and so forth. In my view, and again, taking that long-term view of branding, it's about having the right people in your social circle and in your network. And this is way, way more important than having many people in there. And, there's this famous example of an Instagram influencer called Ari, and she had something like 2 million followers on Instagram, and she decided to launch her own clothing brand. So that sort of relates also to the topic of fashion and style. And she, as part of this promotional launch, she did an initial promo drop of just 36 t-shirts, and she didn't manage to sell them. So this is my favorite example that having a large audience isn't as important. And sometimes even if you have a large audience that hasn't been curated in the right way, and you haven't made all the steps necessary to attract the right people in there, you can basically get nothing out of it. And this is, I think I'm going to stop here, because I think if people need to leave this with one thing in mind, I think having that long-term view and not obsessing over a large audience, but over the right kind of people is the most important.
Yeah. I actually do kind of want to poke at that just a little bit, because I really think that's a great way of looking at it. And I think it kind of relates to a lot of what I've heard around, finding your 100 true fans and things like that. It's not about the number of people that you have. It's about the quality of the people in your circle. And it sounds like that's, Vasi, where you're kind of at, is that it needs to be folks who would come out and buy the t-shirt for you.
Yeah, the reference to the 100 true friends, I remember first reading this from Kevin Kelly. I'm not sure if it's the original read. Definitely a valuable read for people participating in this discussion today. Let's make sure to share this in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess kind of on that same track, I know I do want to touch on this, and then we'll get off of the kind of the quality and get into some of the meat and how do you get started. But I think especially for people that are building like their own companies, or they're building their own agencies or things like that, there can be that pressure that they feel like they have to be basically everywhere and have to be as far out there as possible. What would you guys recommend to those people to kind of temper that? Because I know that probably, if you're trying to get as many users as possible, you're trying to get as many clients as possible, it can feel like that trying to focus on a smaller brand or basically a smaller group of people can be scary. Does it really just come down to who would be willing to go to bat for you ultimately?
Yeah, I think that's basically it. You need to be first and foremost choosing where to be at is all about knowing where your ideal audience is hanging out and just being there. Um, I would be like, you can draw all sorts of metaphors from the real life world, but it all boils down to, if you want to sell friendship bracelets, you're probably going to be good at doing that in front of a Taylor Swift concert rather than, ZZ Top one. It's it's all about thinking through those relationships between specific audiences and their preferred channels. And I may be sort of, going a bit further away from the original question than we want to. And by all means, if I am, just, bring me back. But what I would say is that focusing on the right channels is more important than being everywhere at once. And it's also about managing your resources, because when it comes to personal branding, you rarely can rely on anyone else than yourself for a variety of reasons. And in that case, if you want to start off with just one or two channels, I think that's way better than overextending yourself and being present all over the place and just creating this, iffy, very, very surface level impression in especially if these are the people that matter.
Yeah. And I think basically it kind of ties into the engagement being the important part, right? How engaged is your audience?
Let me build on top of that because Vasi mentioned the idea of avoiding being everywhere. So I'll quote Seneca on this one, right? He who is everywhere is nowhere. So trying to be in all places, it's spreading yourself thin. In my mind and looking at my experience, you have to pick one channel just for one, test the waters, and two, again, probably you have a lot of things going on already to just keep repurposing and trying to be everywhere in the first place. But and we might be going a couple steps ahead of ourselves. I expect us to talk, right, this idea of having your, like, understanding really the value that you have to offer and the narrative that you want to provide to others. But I'm saying that because this idea of the narrative channel fit is something that I keep in mind a lot, because maybe the type of content that you like to produce, your audience is actually on Twitter, not on LinkedIn. If you're a person like me that likes to produce videos, well, actually, maybe you should be playing on YouTube, not on LinkedIn. So, but you have to start somewhere. Draw that line in the sand. Test, right? Understand what metrics you can monitor, but go from there. But again, he who is everywhere is nowhere. I think that's kind of the gist.
Absolutely. And I do want to definitely jump on that narrative channel fit for sure, because I think that's a great way of looking at it. Before we get there, who should be focusing on building a personal brand? Should it be everyone? Is it only specific folks really need to be worried about this? Or, is it everyone can do it at some level?
Who should be building a personal brand? It's a good question. I feel like primarily people that have this urge to share a message, a vision, a mission with a selected group of people. Because the starting point of building that personal brand is a lot of introspective work and soul searching for you to really narrow down what is that message and what makes it important for you. So I feel like everyone could do it. Definitely. Personal branding is not necessarily selling things to people. I like to understand on really understanding personality and values and being true to myself. So in that regard, everyone could just establish their personal brand for sure. Should everyone? Then it's a matter of how much is that urge on communicating at scale? Because at the end of the day, it's a marketing tool, right? We're just trying to communicate something at scale. Vasi, how do you think through this? Who should be thinking about building a personal brand? It feels like so natural to me that I never really pondered on that specific question.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think I want to before answering this in detail, I want to take a step back because as we're talking about building a personal brand, that can actually be a lot of different things for different people. So I'm doing this on a daily basis. This is my bread and butter because as a freelance consultant, I need to be visible in the space for my potential clients. So
Mhm.
for me, there's a very big, very direct link between personal branding and actually, getting my daily bread, as they
Okay.
say. So I need to be working a lot and be sort of posting for my supper on a more consistent scale. At the same time, if we're talking about someone who wants to position themselves as a good expert, someone who
Mhm.
knows their stuff, but they're not looking to expand into their own business or start, launch a startup or be an entrepreneur. These people might be content enough with engaging on social media on a semi-regular, let's call it basis, let's say weekly or something like that, and then making sure that they have a polished profile so that someone who sees them somewhere online or searches for their name, they're gonna have a pretty nicely structured narrative, to John's point, on who these people are and why you should pay attention to what they say. So there are a lot of different levels, and when we're talking about personal branding, I think a lot of people jump straight to the daily posting on LinkedIn and Twitter and doing videos and being the Gary Vee of their industry, and it's not necessarily that. So in that sense, I feel like most people would benefit from taking a moment to have a critical look at how they present themselves online, because this is where future employers are gonna look for you, potential event organizers are gonna look for speakers, and so on and so forth. So everyone nowadays is first googling you, and soon they'll be asking ChatGPT about you. And the better that structure is, the clearer it's going to be why you're someone who's worth listening to.
Okay.
I feel personal branding, though, is most important to a few very specific groups. Freelancers and consultants like myself is
Mhm.
definitely one. People who want to monetize their audience in some shape or form, be it your now classical digital content creator, be it a book author, and so on. We've now heard all about, like, how authors are asked by big publishing houses what's their following on social media before they
Right.
decide to get a contract in there. So that's
Mhm.
already important. And of course, agency founders and startup founders, because in the early days of a company of any type and of any size, having that strong founder personality is one of the key ways in which you're going to attract attention. And just as importantly, and John can talk at length about that, potentially attract future investors as well.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
great. I actually
Let
do want to
me,
jump into that one, John. So,
please.
yeah, it just can you kind of talk through kind of like how it can help with investors and things like that?
Yes, of course. So, on my mind, a lot from what I take from personal branding comes from Chris Do. He's a personality in the UX agency space, has a great personal brand himself, concept of style. I'm going to make sure to also share at least two interviews with him in the show notes. We have this for the audience listening us today. But I love what Vasi mentioned, right? For the early days of a startup or the solopreneur journey, the personal branding is what really counts. And Christo will say that focus on the personal brand in those early days, and then take all this energy and transport that to a brand that will take a life of its own. But it's much more valuable for you to invest on the personal brand and then transfer that energy into a business that again will take a life of its own. But I get the feeling that this discussion is bringing us on why should someone care having a personal brand in the first place? And here, my notes go to multiple directions and angles for this particular question. But I wanted to just start this with quotes that I got from David Sanchez and Hannah Parvas. I was able to meet them both in London last week. And they also converge very nicely on idea of yeah, perception is reality. I think this is the key. So your online presence is often the first impression, is what Vas is suggesting, right? At
Mhm.
some point, that first impression will be just eaten by GPT, and people will ask questions about it.
Mhm.
But I'm sure everyone here heard this idea of first impression is all that matters. Well, perception is reality, and you can trace that back like all the way to the Greeks. So I think this is a part of the puzzle here.
Great. So, kind of moving on from, I guess, kind of more of the theory end of things, I guess let's go ahead and get into the application. So, let's talk about you are just getting started with your personal branding. Where do you need to begin? And I feel like this may tie into some of the things that we've talked about with some of that introspection and some of that kind of narrative channel match, huh?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think one big thing before we even get to channels and formats and figuring out what are the topics that you talk about, I think there's a step even sort of before that. It ties nicely to figuring out who that audience is. Because
Okay.
the other big question is, what do you bring to that audience? So, what's your differentiated value for these people?
Okay.
And this is also something that I often see as a, let's call it a type of deficiency in all the talk that there is about personal branding. People often focus on the practicalities of creating content to build up your personal brand. But what needs to happen before that is actually doing the branding part itself. So
Okay.
figuring out what your brand actually is. And all of this comes to finding what's the value that you bring. So what's your value proposition?
Mhm.
What's your differentiator on the market compared to all the other experts out there? And how are you presenting that in a way that makes sense consistently, as we already sort of alluded to, but also in a way that stands out from others. So having that first step where you're actually building up the strategy behind that brand is sometimes even more important than figuring out what channel you'll be working in and so on and so forth. Because if you do this step right, if you have clear answers on the target audience and what your messaging is, everything else becomes way easier, and every future question is that much simpler to answer because you need to stem from this. So as soon as you arrive at talking about channels, where does your audience hang out? As soon as you start thinking about the topics that you want to include in your posts, then you're thinking through, okay, what's that value that I'm bringing? So I need to be talking about that same type of topics. Like if I'm going to promise you to create the best strategic content marketing plan for you, then what I'll be talking about on social media until I'm blue in the face is going to be how content marketing can be a strategic function.
Okay.
And that's really the place where I feel we need to start.
Yeah. John, anything to
Let me
add on
continue
that?
building. Yeah, let me continue building here. So I feel like we're in the direction of, right, I'm just getting started with this. What are goals? What are tactics? Where to start from? I have a strong planner personality, and I struggle with starting something without having a good picture of where it's going. So
Okay.
I'll take this part of the conversation as my opportunity to explore more this KPI system.
Okay.
PJ, key performance indicator. No, no, no. Hold on. It's key person of influence.
Oh.
And this puts a lot of things in perspective. This particular framework is from the author, serial entrepreneur called Daniel Priestley. And I honestly see a lot of connections to how he put ideas together and how Justin Welsh does his content and material across the networks. Okay, just for context for the people listening to us. So, what is this key person of influence system? It goes along the lines of 5 Ps. And this will also connect to this idea that personal branding is a means to an end. So let me connect to the dots. The first P of a KPI is that you have a perfect pitch. A key person of influence, a person that is really building their personal brand, is able to concisely pitch and enroll people in their core idea. So this is the idea of the narrative. So you're able to kind of bring people in this journey with you. The second P here is publishing your ideas. And this is where the whole idea of the narrative channel comes to place, understanding the audience, understanding the format. But this is just one element of becoming this key person of influence. So you know your pitch, you know how to enroll people in your ideas, you publish constantly your ideas. The third piece is that you productize the value that you create. And here I really enjoy the analogy and how Daniel thinks about the productize, because ideally you have an ecosystem of product. I would try to redo his analogy, but it starts with the Eiffel Tower as a business. If you think about the Eiffel Tower as a business, it doesn't really generate a lot of revenue, right? You can buy ticket, you can go up and down, there's a restaurant, and that's pretty much it. But what really makes money is all the businesses surrounding the Eiffel Tower: transportation, flights, restaurants and cafes, the photographers, the Uber drivers. So this ecosystem makes the much higher margin returns for that, right, for the Eiffel Tower here. So what I'm trying to say is that the key person of influence position themselves as this Eiffel Tower, and around them they have this ecosystem of products for the higher returns and higher margins. And the way to think about that is really like you have a product that you usually give for free as a gift. You have a product for prospects, like usually the one that you're going to sell the most, and a product for VIPs. So you have this ecosystem that the sum of the parts make the higher margin returns that you actually need for the business.
Okay.
Again, we're only on the third P. This only gets better. The fourth P is the profile. Is this idea of, if I Google your name today, how many versions of your profile come up, and how coherent the narrative that you speak across those sources are. Because we're saying that personal branding is an effort over time. It requires consistency. It requires coherency. Coherence. So this is the idea of raising one's profile. And the last one, as you've done all this heavy lift, a key person of influence establish partnerships that just help you to lift your business, right? Is with partnerships, it's kind of partnering with people that either have the idea or either have the resources, and you connect the dots and get things done. So these are the 5 P's of this key person of influence. And then, okay, but PJ, you said that personal branding is a means to an end. Well, the way I like to understand personal branding as an initiative tackles my pitch, my publish, and my profile. If I'm going towards this solopreneur journey, then I start thinking about the products and the partnerships. Mm-hmm. But personal branding alone tackles 3 of those P's in this system. When I look from this 5,000 feet view, that things make sense. It's how I like to understand the whole system and the reason why. But I feel like I'm going to close with this, the concept of, in the spirit of, 1 hour of doing is better than 10 hours of thinking. Being prone to action and start something will just help you clarify or keep shaping your narrative and elements of style and profile. But now at least the listeners have this kind of the framework to think through the different areas of what personal branding means. Yeah. So this is really how I like to think through and geek out when it comes to personal branding.
That is a great way to look at it. And I do want to put a pin in that productizing part of the program, because I think we're going to be talking about that a little bit more closer to the end of the session, because I do think there's some things there that I think we can play with. And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of divide it up, is by that framework. So kind of going on that, I think we had talked about, it's a means to an end. So how do you kind of start setting goals with this kind of thing? I guess, because I think what everybody ultimately thinks about is, they think, oh, I want to get as many followers as possible. And that's kind of like what I think we've proven is not the way to go. So I guess in the beginning, if you're looking for a goal, so let's say you have somebody, their original goal was, well, I want to be, that person with 2 million followers on Instagram. How do you instead shift your mindset to more useful goals in these initial stages when you're, either planning out, which John, I'm with you. I'm a big planner myself. I can never start anything unless I've got like a roadmap somewhere. I may not know exactly the route I get there, but I need to know where that end point is at least. How do you kind of like start thinking about those goals and coming away from the, again, like that misconception of it's all about getting as many people as possible. So what goals should our watchers be thinking about instead?
Yeah, I think I can build up on the last thing PJ said, which was 1 hour of doing trumps 10 hours of planning. And I really feel that this is the place to start. I work with a lot of people who are just starting out in building their personal brand, and I see that they feel very overwhelmed with how to set up goals, how to, how to connect the dots between, growing your audience and your visibility to then attracting leads and getting some form of, a more tangible benefit of building that personal brand. And to me, actually, the place to start off with would be consistency first before everything else.
Okay.
And when I'm talking about consistency, I mean both consistency of publishing
Mm-hmm.
as well as consistency of the experience of your audience. So sure, you need to be aiming at, let's say you set a goal for yourself and you say, I feel comfortable, I can start publishing 3 times a week so that I can stay top of mind for that audience and sort of generate these conversations where we are getting new people excited to meet us and so on. But then it's also about, do I have like a very, a 90% or at least a 70% confidence that I'll be able to not just push something out 3 times a week, but push something out that actually brings value to that audience.
Okay.
So you need to be managing both of these, because I would often see people when I say focus on consistency and they go like, oh, I know what I need to do. I need to publish daily or maybe 2 times a day or 3 times a day. And I'm like, whoa, 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 calm yourself and just start a bit slower. I had this great sort of moment of connecting the dots as PJ does here during one of my contemporary dance classes a few weeks ago. So that's a bit as far away removed from personal branding as you can get. But our teacher, and we're just starting out, and it's very funny because all of us have no experience in ballet or contemporary dance whatsoever. And she was telling us, when you're doing a high fly around, when you are focusing on just lifting your leg up as high as possible, that's the wrong thing to focus on. Instead, what you need to focus on is keeping a good form and improving your range of motion as you go along. So you're probably gonna start with raising your foot at a 45-degree angle rather than the full 90. And that's okay as long as your form is clean and you're not, contorting yourself in all the weird positions.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that links to personal branding and content publishing in general, it's try to start off slower and keep your focus on having a clean form, which means maybe publish once a week or twice a week, but make sure that this content actually represents you as the type of professional and expert that you want to be perceived as.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've mastered this and you feel comfortable posting 2 times a week, then start posting 3 times and 4 times and so on. So I'm gonna leave it here because I think that this is really the first step, and then we can go into more exciting goals as you build up your brand.
I can share my own experience of how I set goals when I decided to start.
Please do.
When I started the whole thing. So I go for like every quarter. I try to go for a 1 week trip out of everything and everyone. I call it the Think Weeks, and I took one of those Think Weeks just to think about, okay, what am I doing about this KPI system? And out of that week, I set myself, okay, in the next 7 days, I want to really think through and get the pitch and the profile
Hmm.
sorted out. So these were the two first, kind of deliverables in a way. So I remember writing my first version, one version two of pitch, and standardizing the way I present myself in terms of profile across all relevant socials.
Okay.
And I got out of that week thinking, of course, okay, now I need to think about the publishing part. But instead of setting myself a target of publishing per unit of time, I actually set myself a discovery goal on understand what format brings you the most joy.
Okay.
And I experimented with slides, with text only, with video, with newsletter. So I kept experimenting with different formats until I found more passion with video.
Okay.
So I just didn't hold myself so strongly accountable or kind of narrow it down into the quantity of posts. I was really into like, what is the format that I really have fun? Because I
Mhm.
don't really want this to feel like work, right?
Yeah.
I already do so much for product and experimentation alone. I want this personal brand thing to feel more like fun as a way to kind of, yeah, explain myself, express myself to others and to the world.
Yeah.
So this was really my experience as I first set myself to do something about it. After I went through the KPI book, and I
Yeah.
had all those ideas like buzzing on my brain.
Yeah. I think that's a really excellent way to kind of get started without all that pressure. Because I think all of us automatically, like Vasi said, automatically go to, I need to be posting, once a day, twice a day. And I think that's a lot of pressure. So I think taking that pressure off is really interesting. And I think that a huge part of it is your format comfort as well. It's like for me, I basically, started off in writing and doing blogs, and eventually just through work has ended up more comfortable with video myself. But that was a process over time that basically I don't think I could have done that on the deep end of things. And I do kind of want to come back to, we had talked about this point with value propositions. And to me, a lot of this is what I'm hearing is this is a little bit like the personal branding is marketing and you are the product kind of thing. So do you guys kind of agree that's kind of where we're kind of at with that?
I mean, Naval Ravikant, again, another connection. He talks a lot about this idea of productize yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that that is straight on in a way, especially if you're looking at this from a wealth generation perspective, right? But again, for me, personal branding does not necessarily mean selling things to people.
Right.
So there is some nuance there.
And Vassy, do you agree?
Yeah. I really have nothing to add on this one. The shortest answer is yes, you're 100% right. That's
Right.
exactly it.
So, and I think kind of going on that marketing front, we had talked value propositions. So, how do you figure this out? Because I'm going to start tying this in a little bit because I think a lot of us have this problem with an inner critic and everything else. So, whenever you're figuring out your value proposition, first and foremost, what are the mechanics of just how do you figure that out? And B, I think, how do you shut up that little voice in the back of your head that kind of says, well, you don't have any right to be talking about this kind of thing?
I can start on this
Yeah.
one. And I like the analogy. So we're talking about value proposition, and it's this idea of, okay, what I have to tell the world is relevant. This reminds me this analogy of the microphone, right? The microphone is only valuable if you know how to sing. If you give a microphone to a terrible singer, it would just amplify bad singing. So the
Mm-hmm.
technology here that we're using is really to amplify a message, but you have to figure out what you have to offer.
Right.
I took note of some helpful questions that helped me, and I remember supporting mentees through Growth Mentor that booked me to talk about the KPI system with those questions. So I'll just share for the group. What is the broad topic I know extremely well? And I
Okay.
feel like every one of us have one broad topic that you know extremely well. And then, okay, what is a niche that you know even better? maybe depending on your career maturity, you're just not at that niche level. And then you already know where to start discovery. But then, okay, so who do you help in that niche? This is to identify your audience.
Okay.
What problem you help them overcome? What do you want to be known for? I love this last one because it's a piece that gets you to think about life mission, legacy, and it all connects to the value proposition. I just feel like this is not set in stone. As we mature as individuals, the mission of being in this place we call Earth refines, and the value proposition changes, and that's okay. I think this is one of the things that I saw mentees kind of struggling, but I just defined my mission a couple months back. Do I need to change my mission? Most likely, because you're maturing as an individual, and that is okay. I saw that on my personal journey as well. But when it comes to the valid proposition figuring out, those are just simple questions. You have Justin Welsh framework that tackles that in a particular way. This is just kind of broad guidelines. Vasi, I feel like you have very very specific experience with this. How do you think it through?
Yeah. So when it comes to fighting through that feeling of that inner critic, the one that's always constantly telling you you're not worthy. So there's a couple of ways to go about it, and I think the one thing that I find very liberating as a thought is that the way the world currently functions and the way that algorithms currently function, bad content just doesn't get seen. So if you flop for whatever reason, if you launch something that doesn't click with your audience, that's not exciting about them, this is very quickly going to get buried in the feed. And we as marketers, we generally cringe at the thought of a post that we've, put all that labor into just flopping and not being seen by people. But in fact, it can be a good thing, especially when you're just starting out and you're experimenting. So don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be, focused on, oh, is this 100% perfect? Is this 100% on brand? Test things out and the market will tell you. And that's the most important signal that you can be looking for. And if it doesn't work out, then you learn something and nobody really cares. That's the truth of it.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that we sometimes forget how much we know as we are starting out and what we can bring to the table. And this is where I would push people to think through a very simple thought exercise, which is think what you didn't know 2 years ago when you were just starting out learning about this topic, whenever that is. It can be 2 years, it can be 6 months, it can be whatever. There were things back then that you were scratching your head over that seem like absolutely clear now. And these are the things that you need to be writing about because people don't necessarily want to learn from the big experts because it almost feels like, yeah, it's going to work for them, but it's probably not going to work for me. I still don't 100% know how to swim, which makes it like very terrifying. I wouldn't want Michael Phelps to teach me how to swim. I want someone who's closer to home. And that's also one of the big benefits. We learn best from people who are just a couple of steps ahead of us. And even if you're just starting out, there are people a few steps behind you and you'll be the best teacher for them.
Very nice.
Yeah, and that's something that it's really funny because this kind of touches on one of the other questions I wanted to talk about as well, which is, I think you kind of have two common issues whenever people are talking about like that value proposition or things like that. And one of them is, oh, I don't have anything interesting to talk about. Or the other one is, oh, I don't know enough about this topic. I'm too new to this area, or I don't have enough experience in my career. And I think kind of looking at from that perspective of you may not have that much experience on that topic, but you can always help the people that are a step behind you. Really, really applies well there. Are there any other tips that you guys have for people that are still kind of struggling on those fronts a little bit? Because I especially feel like, personally for me, I feel like, oh, there's people out there that have 20 and 30 years of experience. What could I possibly add to the conversation kind of thing? And that's where I personally always get stuck. So
Let me comment on the inner critic. First of all, what Vasi mentioned, I think it's pure gold. The way the algorithms work today, it would just not favor something that flop, and
mhm.
that is liberating. But as part of Positive John, right, one of the mantras of this personal brand, if you like to interpret that way, is this concept of being 1% better every day. And the key here is embracing that prolific beats perfect. Prolific beats perfect.
Okay.
But now, two very tactical things that I do for this inner critic, and then we go back to this idea of, yeah, maybe I don't have enough to say compared to people who are much ahead in this industry than me. First of all, I have what I call my cringe group, and they are the people who will see my ready to publish posts, the drafts, before anyone, and
Okay.
they bring me back to reality. And that is just so good, honestly. That is just so good. We have our
Okay.
rituals like, people, it's cringe time. Here's the draft. Shoot. It's great. It's great. I'm
Oh, that
telling
is a
you.
great way of looking at it.
Incredible. And another special tactic here, and it might not be as correlated, but I really saw myself improving. As I travel the world, I go abroad and I do photo shoots. I'll just find a photographer and I'll work with a photographer. Because honestly, being in the open with a photographer puts you in such a cringy and out of your comfort zone situation that I feel like I just won the battle against that critic. Like after you're in Paris in the middle of people in a photo shoot, like the inner critic, like the voice of the inner critic is just like tone deaf.
Yeah.
Those are two very tactical things.
Okay. I love the fact that you've put in that it's kind of your cringe group, because I feel like that doesn't take it too seriously. And that's one of the things that I feel like often happens to us is when we start taking ourselves and our work too seriously, that's when the pressure really comes on and that's when the inner critic really comes out. So I love that way of just kind of like playfully batting the inner critic aside by calling it your cringe group. And I'm kind of making connections here myself to a lot of creative writing because, we
Yeah.
have our own critique partners and things like that we just sit down and we go, guys, please go ahead, rip this apart. Tell me what's wrong with it. Let me fix it, before
Yeah.
you really get it out to, public and publishing it and everything else. So that's, I think, yeah, I'm making a lot of connections myself here. And so any other like activities that you would recommend for kind of like getting the inner critic to kind of be a little bit more tone deaf? Because I think, photo shoots are definitely one. I feel like for me, being on video very often was a big one for me that kind of helped that a little bit,
Yeah.
is just having to do that very often. So,
No,
but
yeah, definitely. I feel that for me, video has been a big thing, and in that sense, a couple of oh wow, a couple of years ago now, it has been little bit of time then. I recorded my own video on demand course on content marketing and brand messaging, and this was a really cathartic experience for me because I first had to shoot the whole thing, and we had like 5 days of shooting. Then I needed to suffer through listening the draft videos, and I absolutely hate my voice and the mannerisms that I now see that I'm doing. I've never paid attention to these before, but still now I know they're there. And then I had to rewatch this again for the final version.
right.
So I feel I'm not sure if it was Tim Ferriss or if someone else mentioned this, that, recording a full on course, this is the moment where you actually figure out you become a quote unquote content creator is when you get desensitized and your voice doesn't actually, sound so terrible to you anymore. And I can 100% agree with this.
That's nice.
And obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean that I would recommend to people to record the course as a way to fight their inner critic. But I already mentioned my contemporary dance classes a little earlier, and I think that finding a thing that is fun for you to do, but that you suck at the start, and you don't even have an expectation that you will become good at one point. This is very liberating because I can compare this to my other, extracurricular activities like running. I'm progressing fairly nicely as an amateur runner. So all the time I'm in this optimization expert brain mode where I'm like, okay, can I shave a few additional seconds off of this, and so on and so forth. So at end of the day, it becomes a chore, just like all the rest of my work. But with something like contemporary dance, I know I'm never gonna dance on stage. That's not happening, but it becomes this weekly reminder that we're also here to have fun and to do stuff that we're passionate about,
Mhm.
and this is all that matters. And I really love what John mentioned earlier, that he first focused on finding the content formats that bring joy, because I feel this is very important. And when I'm talking to people about personal branding, this is one of the main things we discuss as well. You can't really be consistently publishing content that feels like you're getting teeth pulled out on a daily basis. It needs to be something that's pleasant for you to
Mhm.
do. You can't really talk about things that you don't 100% believe in, because you just drop them in a couple of weeks' time, and personal branding needs consistency.
Right.
So bringing that back to our original point, because this became a bit of a ramble here, fighting that inner critic, I feel to a large extent is about remembering, that element of fun and that element to passion that needs to be in a personal brand.
And it sounds like, too, getting, more comfortable with being uncomfortable, which, folks, you heard it here first. Apparently, photo shoots, video, and then dance are all good ways of doing it. Because I've noticed the same thing for me with salsa is Basi, very similar journey to you. I basically walked in going,
Yeah.
I don't know how to dance. I've never known how to dance. I don't expect I'll get good at this. So it was definitely, when I was learning that, it was a reminder of, okay, yeah, and I don't have to put any pressure on myself to be good. So we're getting to the top of the hour. I do want to take just a couple of last questions on, sometimes it feels like personal branding in itself is just a full-time job. Realistically, how much time should you be dedicating to it, and how do you basically keep it from just like constantly expanding and becoming like this black hole that eats up all of your time?
Okay. Let me share quick thoughts on this one. My personal problem is not even the time it takes, especially because I'm on the video side of the force. I love editing video for some reason. I get into an incredible flow, and that takes an incredible amount of time that I don't even want to think too much about it. But again, my problem is not how much time it takes, but how ephemeral it gets if the effort is not well planned, right?
Okay.
Because a post on LinkedIn will live for a week and then will die. And then that effort is lost. Well, no, to counter that, I started thinking a lot more evergreen, meaning
Okay.
that a piece of content or media that I put energy into producing must work harder than a week, and must yield more. And this connects to the product ecosystem, right? So a post that goes on LinkedIn also is part of an evergreen newsletter, and you can repurpose those things in a more natural way. And then the time that it takes, it really dilutes across how much yield over time you get if you
Mhm.
think about it beforehand. But on the practical side, I tend to dedicate Mondays and Wednesdays mornings to writing. But this is more of a habit that I cultivate over the years. I just love to start the days that way. right? Today is Wednesday morning. I started the day with a cup of coffee and it's time to write. So I think it's better to think more about the habit around content creation than just trying to time block too much things in the agenda. But
Okay.
that's really my take. I'm curious to hear from you, Vasi.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, repurposing and planning for content to really be evergreen is one of the best approaches. I've actually been running a sort of a social or social media, depending on how you look at it, experiment for a while now. I have a blog where I've made a point to only write pieces that are evergreen. And I've actually done an automation setup with CoSchedule. The tool has this functionality where you can feed it a certain type of set of posts, and it will resurface these posts on a regular basis. And this is 100% the same post. So it's the text is the same, the link is the same, the image is the same, everything is the same. And I've created a queue of posts that bring back attention to my blog. And this has been running now for more than 2 years for sure, if not even longer. And some of these posts, obviously, there are guardrails, so you don't, share this exact same post 2 weeks off of each other or something like that. But still, some of these posts have been reposted 4 or 6 or even 8 times during this time. And the curious thing is that every time I get new traffic from these posts back to the blog, every time there are people who comment that this is a really interesting post and they found something useful in it. And I've never had, within these couple of years, never a single person said something along the lines of, hey, you actually posted this a while back. So this is sort of a great example that if you have evergreen content, you need to make sure to resurface it again and again. And this isn't necessarily like the only viable way of doing it. You can play around with it quite a lot, but this is just an example. And getting back to these important habits, as PJ mentioned, I think one big thing is training yourself to notice new things. I really love, PJ, your way of using Obsidian to collect these notes and find the links between each of them. I've seen that in action when we've had chats, and it's amazing to watch. But even if you start simple with one note on your phone that's available as a shortcut, where you just dump ideas about things you can write about, in time you're going to generate a backlog of interesting and useful ideas, and you have the the opportunity to choose from this list what to actually focus on today, which is one of the big pain points for most people working on a personal brand is, sitting in front of the computer, staring at the screen and being like, I have no idea what to write about.
Right.
So training your brain to work in that way and to always collect these ideas for future use, I think that's going to be very useful, so that when you sit down to actually write, and I do much the same thing, I dedicate Mondays to creating my content for the whole week. This is when you can actually be comfortable that you're never going to run out of things to say.
Got it. Now, guys, I do want to be respectful of time, but do we just have 5 more minutes for me to touch on one last question?
Yeah, good on my end.
All right. I have to hit on the selling point because I know that a lot of times this personal branding point gets tied up in selling. And I know, John, you mentioned the productized side of this and basically how do you sell? So how do you kind of intermarry those things? I guess, how do you take your personal brand and then if you are a freelancer, if you're somebody providing a service, if you are coming up with products, how do you blend those two things together? And John, I think you've probably got a lot to say about this as far as the KPI system goes. So
Yeah, the idea of selling. I'll take this on the angle of how to feel less funny about pushing the selling points. Uh, Again, 100% the KPI system. The book has great examples around the product ecosystem and how to think about that. I love to think about the free gift. And again, to feel less funny, I just provide and offer more of the free gifts that I have for people more often. And a free gift can be a newsletter or a piece of media that you created. It just has to feel like a gift that is well packaged, and
Mhm.
it's the intention is correct. So you're
Okay.
not pushing. It's something that the timing is right. So this makes me feel less funny about it, and really limiting the amount of times that I try to kind of sell what I consider the product for prospects. So I'm
Mhm.
just very confident expanding the reach of the gift, right? The newsletter, the videos. And then I reserve the product for prospects, which is kind of, okay, work with me for a very few people that really resonate. And at the end of the day, they come to you,
Right.
not the other way around, just because
Okay.
of the amount of gifts that you distributed and the positive karma that the personal brand generated by its own.
Bessie, would you agree with
Yeah.
that? Or?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So if we think about selling, there are a couple of things here. As a rule of thumb, I would generally try to limit, promoting your work outright and pushing people to buy or test out your new course or whatever it is, to maybe something like 20 to 30% of your content, and all of the rest of it needs to be highly valuable, highly impactful stuff that you share for free. So you can think about it as a sort of a bank account where you're, with every valuable post, you're putting money into the account, and then you're essentially putting goodwill into this account. And
Mhm.
then with every post that's more promotional, you're taking money out of it. So the balance always needs to be positive for this to work. And obviously there are going to be times where you need to, let's say, push a launch for a new offering or something like that, and in these cases you can still be a bit more aggressive with the promotional type of post, but you still need to, over a longer period of time, keep this balance up. And one thing I usually do is more of a softer selling approach. So what I would do is, in my value packed posts, I would still mention something that directs the attention of the reader towards the fact that I can be useful to them as a consultant or as a freelance expert. So it can be something as simple as, if I'm doing a post on how to do topic research and find the topics that are
Mhm.
especially relevant to your audience, I'm going to start this post saying something along the lines of, this is something that my clients are very excited about, or something along those lines, or this is something that my clients find especially challenging. So it isn't really about, and book me to do this for you, but it still drives the attention towards that idea of, oh, that's something she actually does for clients, so maybe she can do it with our company as well. And then one thing that I just recently tested for the very first time to really nice results is doing a sort of a 1-2 punch, where you would be pushing valuable information related to your offering, and then actually engage with the people in a more direct way when they actually show interest in it. So what do I mean? A few weeks back, at the start of May, I actually launched the first cohort of my own personal branding course.
Mhm.
And when I did that as a lead into that offer, I did a couple of things. I did a webinar on the approach that I take to personal branding. I did a bunch of posts that were showing good examples of personal branding and all of that stuff. So it was all about giving useful information to people, and providing that information for people who might be interested in personal branding. So what I did in the end is, at the end of the webinar, this is a very common practice, there was an offer for a bonus that people could get if they signed up for the personal branding course. And for the people who engage with my posts about personal branding on LinkedIn, I sent them a direct message telling them more about the course. So I didn't do, all crazy outreach on LinkedIn to thousands of people and spam their DMs. I actually reached out to people who already expressed interest, and I said something along the lines of, hey, I'm very thankful for your support, your engagement, your reaction to this post or your comment. It helped me go further, and be seen by more people. So thanks about that. And in the case where you're actually interested in the course itself and you want to dive deeper into personal branding, here's what I have in store for you. So this was a less cringy way of reaching out to people than, just spray and pray.
Right. All right. Well, I think that is a great wrap to our session. Thank you so much, John, Veselana. Thank you so much for joining us. People, feel like we need to end a personal branding webinar on where can folks find you. LinkedIn, best place?
LinkedIn, best place.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, people will be able to see everything that there is to see about me on LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So guys, you heard it here. Basically connect with Vasi and John on LinkedIn. And of course, if you want to get more on personal branding, join Growth Mentor and you can have one-to-one sessions with them. But we will go ahead and wrap there. Thank you all so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
That's it. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.